world where growth is the game changer and experience paves the path to success, comes a podcast series that brings together visionaries and practitioners to explore how to capture value-creating growth. This series will bring you insight from the front lines of decision-making. We'll bring decades of collective wisdom to share the best practices of leadership, strategy, and governance.
I'm Tom Doorley, Chairman and founder of Sage Partners. On today's podcast, Focus on Growth, we're going to be talking about M&A and specifically the rebound. M&A is an important and a viable growth strategy. With me today is Barry Weiner. Well, Barry and I have known each other for a long time, back to our days as strategy consultants at Deloitte Consulting. Since then, Barry has gone on to run companies and today speaks to us from his position as the head of research for an important practice for Deloitte. It's M&A practice, by the way, an important practice for Sage as well. Barry, thank you for joining.
Tom, it's a pleasure to be here and great to be collaborating with you today.
Yeah, I think you have a very valuable perspective here because you come at it from that of a strategist and an operator. So in fact, what we're going to do is talk about what it means, the results of the survey you've done, and how it is we put that to practice. So with that, tell us a little bit about the survey, its scope, and what you've done with it.
Absolutely, Tom. The survey that we did called Mind the Gap, the 2024 M&A Trend Survey, is a 10-year effort. We do this every year at Deloitte. And for this year, it was the biggest of its kind. So 1,500 respondents, divided equally between private equity and corporate respondents. And also notable is that it's the most senior sample we've ever had, with about 72% all C-suite residing, whether it's private equity fund or corporate. The questions run the full gamut of M&A, from M&A targeting and strategy to M&A integration on the tail end, and all of it's covered.
So make the case that there's going to be a rebound because some of your data shows what happened back in 2023 and a little bit before that. So why do you see it's going to be a rebound? By the way, I agree with you, but nonetheless, tell the audience.
No, absolutely. There's a number of reasons. We are cautiously optimistic and remain so now in March that there will be a rebound. And in fact, a rebound is a little bit underway for M&A. And there's a few reasons for that, Tom. First, the survey results themselves show a uniquely high level of optimism on the part of our respondents, with more than 90% expecting there to be a rebound this year and expecting greater results in terms of volume of deals as well as value of deals. So the optimism in the survey is one reason. What's another reason? Another reason is the economy that surrounds us. As we all know, there's an expectation on the part of most experts that the Fed will ease its monetary policy and reduce interest rates sometime around mid-year summer. That is a tailwind for M&A always because so many deals are debt financed. That's number two. Third reason is the actual results that have come in December, January, and February, which after a very down and soft year in 2023 picked up markedly, not to the levels that we saw in 2022, which was a gangbusters year, but nevertheless coming back to historical norms. So December, January, February, from a value perspective, the value of total deals in aggregate, much more encouraging. And we're optimistic that will continue into the summer as we get that tailwind from the Fed. And again, we expect, without a crystal ball, no guarantees, of course, but we expect M&A to recover.
I understand, and I hope you're right, and I think you're right. We're seeing that activity with our clients as well. But let me now throw a little bit of a curveball that you and I have talked about before, and that is that our research over the years, and we have a pretty tight screening criterion for whether a deal is successful after the fact, says maybe only a third of them work. Recently, Wall Street Journal says maybe it's 50-50. So we've got here a coin flip, right? So why should we spend all this effort, all this time, disrupt organizations, spend the money for a coin flip? Or let me offer it this way. What do you think is going to be better this time that the odds are going to be improved? More winners than losers?
Sure. It's a related but slightly different question, Tom. On the one hand, the research that we were just talking about is about the M&A market coming back and more deals being attempted. That doesn't speak to their success rate. The success question that you're asking, the curveball, is a wonderful question. It's one of my favorite questions, actually. And with that, of course, we've learned a little bit over these decades. You and I both have, but as a firm, Deloitte has, in terms of what it takes to have a successful deal. And I think that learning is now really embedded in the DNA of CEOs, CFOs, and deal makers to a greater degree than it might have been in the past around the importance of careful planning, careful preparation, better linkage, if you will, between front end and back end, diligence teams with integration teams, and those kinds of things. So yes, I think we can express some optimism that the success rate should be improving over time, and we're seeing that to some degree. But there's still a significant opportunity to ensure that those deals achieve the ROI that the deal makers always seek.
Yeah, there's another point that in your survey that I liked, and I think also bears relevance. So I'll give you credit for this as well, and that is that the companies have spent time during the quiet period to restructure, to get themselves in better shape. So they're much stronger today than they were. And when you're stronger, you can afford to do things like M&A and take a little bit of a hit here and there.
That's absolutely true, Tom. Absolutely true. It was a key finding in the study, as you noted. Last year, because the M&A market was so soft, the IPO window was relatively closed, and there wasn't much deal making happening. We had more than 90% of our respondents focused on internal restructuring and transformation, specifically with a focus on technical transformation, but also commercial and financial. So to your point, and to the study's point, really, the respondents' point, the companies are much better prepared, I think. They're leaner, they're more agile, they're more technically enabled, and thus better positioned, to your point, to do deals more successfully, perhaps. Yes.
I think you're right. And so one of the things we've also learned, and that comes through not directly, but in sort of the work that I've seen you all do, is that this is a learned competence. The more you do, well, as long as you capture the learning and share it and all that sort of thing, the better you can get. So that's important. But there's another thing that struck me from your survey, and that is you talked to the importance of the front end. You called the strategy and preparation work, and you referred to, which I think is a good word, the deal thesis. You have to have a good thesis for why this works, what the valuation is, and all that sort of thing. But I noticed there was about a 10 to 15 point difference in the priority of post-merger planning and close. How do you address that? Does that sort of worry you a little bit, at least? That does me.
Just to be more specific here, Tom, the findings basically showed there was a much greater focus on the front end, right? The front end, so preparation and planning. And from an M&A lifecycle perspective, that would refer to targeting, a thesis, like you said, deal thesis, and ultimately going into diligence, which is earlier stage. The concern that you expressed in terms of the back end, the integration, I think that's a good concern for us all to remember and keep front of mind, because oftentimes what happens is when you have the handoff from the deal thesis and the diligence teams to the integration teams, there's a breakdown there. And on the one hand, the companies are better positioned for it, and we certainly are more aware of this maybe than we were 20, 30 years ago, but it still is definitely an issue. And it's something that all companies and all private equity funds would be well advised to keep front of mind. The tight linkage of those two aspects. Yes, absolutely important, critical.
That's a good point. We emphasize that in terms of our clients. And in my next episode, I'm going to be talking with one of our clients who did a deal, and I tell them why it is the company we picked to be the acquirer, because they focused on deal integration early and often. So let's turn to the attention of, which I think is a very interesting way to describe your survey, mind the gap. What does it mean, Barry, and what are the implications? It's a captivating title, I'll tell you.
Indeed. Anyone that's ever taken a trip to the UK knows all about Mind the Gap. Be careful when you get on the tube. Nevertheless, the reason we adopted that title for this study is really about the second half of the work. We've talked a little bit about the front half, which is about the prediction we're making for a rebound this year in the macroeconomics. The second half, the gap, refers to a gap that represents opportunity, Tom. So as I told you in the beginning with regard to the sample characteristics, this survey is the biggest respondent pool we've ever had at 1,500. But beneath that 1,500, we divided the sample equally between private equity leaders and corporate leaders. And we did that intentionally because of the answer to your question. We wanted to mind the gap between private equity and corporations, which typically only interact around special kinds of transactions. Sometimes private equity will finance a corporate transaction. Sometimes a private equity firm may buy a division of a corporation, or vice versa. The strategic rationale for M&A, of course, is different for private equity than it is for corporations. But we surmised that there'd be more opportunity in the future for private equity and corporations to learn from each other and cooperate with each other, collaborate with each other. And that's what that gap is all about. And we want to mind it for greater value.
I think that's really very interesting because, as you point out, the perspectives, the business models, and all of the two are different. You're working with a strategic corporation, and then you're looking at something that can take some time to integrate. Whereas PE. They want to have a good hit early and then try to get on and move on to the next one. But I think that's a really good point. So talk about how they can learn from one another. Well, what are some of the learnings that the corporates can learn from PE and vice versa?
Sure. Well, two of the key findings that came up on both sides, one of the questions that we asked was, of the private equity firms, what is it that you most admire about the corporations and their approach to M&A? And then we went over to the corporate side and asked them the same question with regard to PE. So two of the findings that really came up at the top is from a PE perspective. What do private equity firms most admire or would seek to emulate potentially on the part of corporates and corporate approaches to M&A? A big answer there, Tom, had to do with talent. As we all know, there's a bit of fear around M&A that exists in organizations because people can lose jobs, things can be cut. But the corporations generally are thought to do a better job around considering those people elements, the communications, the retention of key staff, the assignment of key executives to newly acquired divisions to ensure they're brought into the fold and consistent with the culture and those kinds of things. The private equity firms generally give the corporations credit for that, and we think rightfully so. On the other hand, the corporations looking at the private equity firms, and this will be less surprising, I think, to most listeners, really look at them as being quite savvy in terms of the analytics, the use of technology, and the data. And that makes sense, of course, because private equity is an investment objective, right? They're trying to realize a return on investment in anywhere from 3 to 7 years, whereas for the corporations, it's about 1 + 1 = 3, and synergy realization over a longer time horizon. So the corporations believe, yes, we have some opportunity to be more disciplined around our use of data, our quantification of our thesis and our results, and thus the learning and collaboration. There's more to that I can tell you about, but that's initially just two of the big findings in terms of the learning and what they admire.
So could you in fact envision a corporation and a private equity going into a strategic alliance themselves with a company they might both like, but neither feels they can handle alone?
Not only could I envision it, Tom, it's happening. And many of the listeners will know that. We see examples today, and I can't name names of companies, of course, because I am with Deloitte. But nevertheless, you may be familiar, for example, with a new financing mechanism called private credit or private lending.
Right.
Private lending refers to, rather than a bank, a private equity firm actually using some of its cash, because there's a lot of cash on the sidelines now, to help finance a deal. And the deal might be a corporate deal to make an acquisition of a target of interest to both parties. That's been happening in Europe and the United States to some degree. It's not a huge phenomenon now, but it's a new one and it's a growing one. And that's just one example of places where exactly what you're asking if I can envision is actually proving out in the marketplace.
I think that's a good idea. Years ago, I wrote a book that just a long time ago called Teaming Up, and it focused on strategic alliances and the importance of how it is you link them and all that sort of thing. So that's really a good thing to see. Absolutely. Other facts on the mind the gap that you see are important, Barry.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a big one has to do with simple structuring of deals, Tom. So normally, as we talked about a little bit earlier when we were in the macroeconomic part of our conversation, we made the comment I did, you did, around debt financing and how interest rates being high as they are now, that's really a headwind to M&A, right? Yeah. But on the other hand, one thing that we're seeing is the increasing use of all equity deals. So last year, for example, in 2023, as we got toward the later part of the year, which was a very down year, most of 2023, the two biggest deals of last year were all equity deals. Now, with an all equity deal, that's a function of the stock market, of course. And as most know, the stock market has been pretty healthy and pretty frothy here in the first quarter of 2024. So the use of equity is interesting because when you talk about private equity and corporations getting together to maybe jointly acquire a deal or an alternative structure like a joint venture or a strategic alliance, the use of equity is a different currency than actually debt financing or, for that matter, cash.
Sure. So if we're getting ready to sort of wrap up here, Barry, how can people get a copy of this report? Because I've read it and I like it, and I think it'd be useful for our audience.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you so much for asking. The report is available to all, and by going on to Deloitte.com, the website for Deloitte, the Deloitte U.S. firm, and just typing in the search window, Mind the Gap. It'll come right up, and you'll see a downloadable PDF there that you can download. We also have webinars that we do. We've done one already, which is available for replay on the macroeconomic side. We'll be doing another one in early May on the Mind the Gap side.
Great. Super. Thank you for your time, Barry. I look forward to us continuing to relate together. And to our audience, our next episode is going to pick up with the comments that Barry and I have talked about and look at an actual situation where a client got bought, sought it through. We'll talk about process. We'll talk about those issues, and we'll be on again. So thank you for listening. We appreciate it. Look forward to our next conversation, and take care.
Take care. Thank you so much.
Experience creating value, leadership, strategy, governance. Join us to transform the way you think about the big things you face and how to act to achieve success.